Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my deadline decisions for Game Week 6. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel, or potentially if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, drop a like on the video as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So because I'm recording this actually after the press conferences on Friday, as well as answering your questions, which I always do in this weekly series, I'm actually able to react to the information that we got in the press conferences. But unfortunately, the first topic of conversation, Ben Chilwell, there didn't seem to be any questions asked. So just as an update on what has happened, Ben Chilwell, we knew would be starting the season in quite an attacking role, and he's basically been playing as a left winger. So Chelsea haven't really been playing as a back five with Ben Chilwell left wing back, which is what some people think. They're pretty much playing a back four, and Chilwell is playing pretty much as just a standard left winger. Now, he is obviously a little bit more defensive than a natural left winger, and also maybe his attacking threat isn't as high. But by all accounts, he is almost playing as a left winger. Now, in the game in Game Week 5, Pochettino said we have to win, we have to show that we're Chelsea, we have no excuses. And then he went on to say that we're going to play Mudryk in the position that Chilwell has been playing because we wanted to play with a slightly more offensive player and we want to keep the same back four. There's a few things here. Firstly, it does demonstrate that Chilwell is not a left winger, and Pochettino will admit that Chilwell is not the most attacking player that he could play in that position. And it also shows you that Pochettino is happy with the same back four, and he wants to try and steady the ship and keep that back four as consistent as possible. So what that essentially means is Chilwell is probably not going to get, as far as we're concerned, much game time in that back four. At the moment, it appears to be Chilwell who is favoured in that left back spot, which really means Chilwell, if he wants to get into that starting 11, needs to continue playing as the left winger. The good thing for Chilwell owners, if you want to keep and start Chilwell, is that Mudryk didn't play particularly well. You can see here on SofaScore he was rated as a 7, but I think that's maybe slightly generous. He didn't have a good game at all. And actually, when he came off, rather than Chilwell coming on in the left wing role, what we saw is Sterling pushed out to the left. So is that slightly concerning? Potentially, because it could be that even if Mudryk now doesn't start on the left wing, it could be that it's either Cole Palmer on the left, it could be that Sterling is pushed out to the left and someone else plays on the right. So there are a variety of things that can happen, and by all accounts, I would say that Chilwell is now a rotation risk. Unfortunately, as far as we saw, no journalists asked Pochettino anything about Chilwell in the press conference. But what we have in press conferences are embargoed quotes. And what that essentially means is some quotes are held back from the media until later on in the evening. So I think it's around sort of 10 or 11 p.m. UK time. That might be slightly wrong, but basically later this evening, after this video goes live, we sometimes get other quotes that are leaked from the press conferences that weren't made available immediately during and after the press conferences. So it could be that around 10 p.m., 11 p.m. UK time, all of a sudden we start getting some quotes and questions around Ben Chilwell. So basically what I'm saying here is if you are deciding whether to start him, sell him, buy him, probably not buy him, but start him or sell him, or potentially bench him, I would just wait until later this evening, maybe even wait till the deadline, just in case some embargoed quotes come out, which allow us to have a bit more information around whether he's likely to start. If you would like my opinion, and this is genuinely just an opinion, because as you can see, we don't have that much information, I would expect Chilwell to come straight back in. I would actually expect pretty much exactly the same starting lineup here, but maybe just a straight switch where Chilwell comes back in for Mudryk. But that is just an opinion. That's just the vibe that I get. And also because it's Aston Villa. This isn't a weak team that they're playing against. I would argue that at the moment, Villa may even be the better side. And I feel like Chilwell not only offers some decent threat going forward, but because he is naturally a left back, he also offers them a bit of solidity at the back as well. So I think that Chilwell will start. I don't know that. I also don't have an issue with selling him. And me, myself, at the moment, I am probably going to sell Ben Chilwell for one of Trippier or Fabian Schär because I just don't need the headache. I don't know that it will start. And yes, he is very attacking. And actually, Chelsea have been the third best defence in the league this season for expected goals conceded. So they're a good defence. Chilwell's very attacking, but I just can't have it every single week where I'm like, I don't know if my player is going to start. And the issue with Chilwell is I think he will come on if he doesn't start. And that is a real issue because what you tend to get is just 1 point cameos. Like last week, I had Sven Botman's 9 points. He just sat there ready to come on, but Chilwell came on for 5 minutes. And I think this is the issue we have with him, that if he doesn't start, he's almost definitely going to cameo off the bench. So all of that to say, I would probably be happy selling him. I'm probably going to sell him this week. But if you do want to hold on to him and you do want to start him, I actually think there is a good chance that he starts against Villa. I'd love to know what your opinion is on this down below. I think now is a pretty decent time to sell him. So quite a few of you are asking questions around Foden, Alvarez. I also want to talk about Doku, who I do also talk about at the end of the video as well, because I quite like the idea of a punt on him. And also just to discuss the press conference updates that we got from Pep Guardiola. I would say that Man City rotation is fairly low at the moment because they just don't have the options available. I would quite comfortably sit here and tell you that I'm pretty sure that Foden and Alvarez start. The good thing is, though, and I'll say this before we even move on to the news, City are technically the early kickoff because we don't have a 12:30 UK time kickoff on Saturday. There are 3 p.m. games, and City are one of those games, and we do quite often get City team leaks. So there is a very good chance that we get this information before the deadline anyway. So I would wait, but just in case you're in a time zone or you're not available because you're working, I will give you all of the information that I have and just tell you that I think there is a very good chance that Foden and Alvarez start. The reason for that is, as you can see, Kovacic was quoted as coming back, so he's in the process of coming back into the team, but that would suggest to me that he's certainly not going to start. Maybe he won't even be involved this weekend. Grealish could play some minutes, so I would expect Grealish to be on the bench, but very, very unlikely to start when he's just coming back from injury. And Bernardo Silva has been ruled out. I think Pep said either 7 to 10 days or 1 to 2 weeks. I think what he's essentially saying is he's definitely out for this week. He'll be back soon. It's not a long-term injury, but they're still assessing him day by day. So if there's no Kovacic, there's no Grealish, and there's no Bernardo Silva, I mean, who are they? If they're dropping Foden and Alvarez, who on earth are they playing in these positions here? And I would even go as far as saying that I think Doku is fairly nailed at the moment as well. So the 3 players on your screen, I would feel fairly comfortable buying, starting, holding. And if I was on a wildcard, I would have a triple City attack. So if you've not yet seen my wildcard draft, I uploaded that earlier today. So after you've watched this video, you can go back and watch my wildcard draft for Game Week 6. I would have Haaland, I would have Alvarez, and I would have one of Foden or Doku as well. Of course, like I said, the great thing is we can wait and probably get some early City team news before the deadline, but I just don't see who they're starting, if not Alvarez and if not Foden. And Pep just keeps coming out and putting all these positive quotes out about Alvarez, and he's done it in the past. There was 2 times. One time before he positively praised Foden, and then Foden went on to get benched 2 or 3 games in a row. And you remember he did it last season as well with Ake. So he kept praising Ake about how versatile he was and how good he was in the team, and how good he was on the ball. And then Ake went on to get benched like 2 or 3 games in a row. So I know Pep can do Pep things, but I think this is different. I think this is very different to in the past when they've got a stacked bench. When you've seen in the past, like they've got lots of Foden, Mahrez, Silva all on the bench. Like they just don't have that at the moment. Even to the extent that they've now obviously sold Cole Palmer as well. These are just players that they've just let go and they've not really replaced. They've got injuries as well. So I'll leave it there. Basically, I think you're absolutely fine buying Foden. I think you're absolutely fine buying Doku, Alvarez, and I would definitely start them. But I guess there's no need to do that now because Alvarez has already risen in price. Foden and Doku, you can just wait for the information that we get on Saturday to decide if you want to buy them and if you want to start them. But I'm very, very jealous of people that have multiple City attackers because whilst Forest have started the season fairly well and they do look a little bit better away from home this season, it's still a game that you would expect City to score quite a few goals in. So if Man City rotation seems to be at an all-time low, I would say Brighton rotation seems to be at an all-time high, and I feel like De Zerbi is the new Pep Roulette because obviously they're playing in Europe this season. They've got quite a few attacking options. They've also got injuries, people coming back, getting injured, and I just feel like it's very, very difficult to try and predict the Brighton lineup at the moment. So obviously Brighton played on Thursday in Europe. They lost 3-2. A lot of their players got decent minutes, but also quite a few of them didn't get like the full 90 minutes. De Zerbi was asked, will he have to make a lot of changes this weekend? And of course, his answer was yes, a lot. And he emphasised the a lot in the press conference. And he also went on to say that it's more difficult for Brighton than it is for the likes of Liverpool and West Ham, the other 2 teams that are playing on a Thursday, along obviously with Aston Villa, because he said they're used to it. And I would say that whilst this feels a little bit like he's making excuses, it's also true. Like the more that these players get used to playing Thursday to Saturday or Thursday to Sunday, the more used to it they are, not only physically, but also mentally as well. So it probably is going to be difficult for Brighton this season. And we discussed this at the start of the season as well. It was one of the reasons that I said I don't think you want to load up on like triple Brighton because once game week 4, 5, 6 kicks around, when Europe kicks in, we knew that it would become quite tricky for them. Also, immediately after or before the game on Thursday, De Zerbi came out and said that Ferguson and Dunk would be playing. And then after that, in the press conference, we've now had information that actually Dunk and Ferguson might miss out. So he said that he's actually not sure about the availability of Dunk and Ferguson. Dunk is a muscular issue and Ferguson is an illness. And he said we'll have to wait and see around Ferguson. So it is impossible basically to predict Brighton at the moment. I certainly probably wouldn't be going out and buying Brighton assets. But I feel like there are certain assets that I would be happy starting. So Estepinian, I still feel like you've got to start. Yes, there is a chance he misses out again, but I wouldn't expect him to regularly miss minutes in the Premier League because whilst Europe is very important for Brighton, I still feel like they will prioritise the league and they'll want to put out their best 11. So I feel like Estepinian won't regularly be rested. I think he's fine to start. I would say the same for Mitoma as well. whilst Mitoma will be rotated this season, and again, it's another reason that I didn't go for him, he is still probably their first choice attacker out of all of their options. And I think more often than not, he will start. So whilst I wouldn't be going out and buying Mitoma, it's certainly not for me anyway a week to sell him or a week to bench him, especially with the fixture against Bournemouth. So for me, Mitoma's fine. And then I would actually say that JPedro is probably a player I would be happy keeping and starting. Now, the issue is he played very, very decent minutes in Europe, but he played well. He scored a brace. We know how good he is on penalties as well. His data's been pretty good, and I would argue that JPedro looks like one of their better attackers. Obviously, we're seeing quotes from De Zerbi around the fact that he doesn't quite trust the way that JPedro presses, and he still has some stuff to learn, but it feels crazy to me to not be playing him at the moment. And I think especially if Ferguson is out due to illness, which we don't yet know, we may not know before the deadline, then starting Welbeck and JPedro together feels like a fairly straightforward decision. Of course, they have other options as well. But I think there's a small chance, or a decent chance at least, that JPedro does start. So I wouldn't feel comfortable benching him. But again, it's not a situation where I would go out and buy him. It's not a situation where if you've got like 7 other really good attackers and you want to bench JPedro, of course I understand that. But I would also be pretty happy starting him. Ferguson's a pretty tricky one because you can't sell Ferguson, I don't think, before Bournemouth. But I also wouldn't feel comfortable starting him when he's missed out completely in Europe. And then De Zerbi's come out and said that actually he's ill and we don't know if he's going to play or not. It makes me feel uncomfortable about starting him. So I think if you are a Ferguson owner, that's probably the trickiest position you can be in because it feels madness selling him before Bournemouth. But I also think based on this information that we have, there's a very good chance that he doesn't play. So maybe, as I said with Chilwell, wait for potential embargoed quotes, wait for maybe a little bit of information on Saturday. But because they play on the Sunday, I think there is a very good chance that we don't get information around any of the Brighton assets. And all of this is just probably enough for me to completely avoid Brighton at the moment. I mean, I've still got Estepinian, and I don't feel a need to sell him yet. But I may well go completely without Brighton on my Game Week 10 wildcard. The issue is their fixtures are quite good. But just at the moment, there's too much rotation. So let me know what you plan on doing with your Brighton assets. Let me know if you have the likes of JPedro, Mitoma, Ferguson, what you're planning on doing. For me, luckily, I only have Estepinian, and I still feel comfortable enough to start him. So there are actually a few questions around specific players that were quite lowly owned, and also 2 questions. One person was on a wildcard, and they wanted to know on a wildcard, are there any differentials I fancy? And then the alternative, which is someone that's wildcarding soon and just looking for a couple of differentials to hopefully shoot them up the ranks. And whilst I don't necessarily encourage you looking at ownership too much, because I think it tends to muddy our thinking, because the idea of FPL is to pick the players you think will score the most points. And when you start looking at picking players just because they're lowly owned, you're ignoring a whole lot of players that are maybe better options that are slightly more highly owned. And even in the other direction, if you pick players that are just highly owned because you want to be protective and defensive, you might be missing out on players that, yes, not a lot of other people have, but might be better options. So most of the time, I tend to advise you either just try not to look at ownership or try not to at least let it impact your thinking. But some of the time I get it because FPL can be really stale. It can be. And this is why a lot of your workmates and friends and family will end up stopping playing FPL after like 6 or 7 weeks because it can get a little bit stale week on week. So I understand wanting to have fun with it. And with that in mind, here are some of the differentials that I don't mind for the upcoming game week. So I've just put a little star next to the ones that I really like, but we'll fly through them. Fabian Schär is on this list because he is very lowly owned. And if you do want a differential, I actually like him in comparison to Botman and Trippier. I still feel like Botman is better value, and I still feel like Trippier has more attacking threat. But if you do want to pick a Newcastle defender who's going to get the same amount of clean sheets as Trippier and Botman, but is lowly owned, Schär could be the one. And usually his attacking data is very good. We haven't seen that yet this season, but for 5 million, he could be a bargain. And he is very, very nailed, as you can see, 450 minutes. He's basically played every minute available this season. Neto is one of those options. If you're wildcarding in 7 or 8, or you just want a 1-week punt, Neto playing against Luton, his data's been really good this season. 0.62 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Whilst Wolves aren't the best team at converting their chances, and whilst the fixtures aren't great long-term, if you're just looking for a short-term 1-week punt, and then you can maybe bench him next week, Neto could be good. And I am actually really interested. And he's passing the eye test too, but it's just a little bit too short-term for me. I tend to prefer thinking a little bit longer-term. The main one that I want to discuss, because I'm desperate to get him into my team, but I just can't quite justify it, is Edouard. The reason I say I can't justify it is I think Alvarez is still a slightly better option. But if you don't have the money for Alvarez, or you've already got him, or you just don't fancy him as a punt, Edouard would be towards the top of my list because he's finally getting the minutes that he deserves. Edouard has always shown pretty good data. He's always passed the eye test. He's just not got enough minutes. He's always been quite heavily rotated with the likes of Mateta. Whereas at the moment, it does look like his first choice. You can see here, 429 minutes. So whilst I'm not a Palace fan, and whilst I can't confirm to you that it will start every game, The minutes are there. The data is the best on this list at a 0.81 non-penalty expected goal involvement. And the fixtures are there for Palace coming up as well, especially in game week 6. So top of the differential list for me is Edouard. And if I could take a punt on him, I probably would. And if I was in a 4-3-3, or sorry, a 3-4-3 on my wild card, if I wasn't in a 3-5-2, I probably would go for Edouard. But as I said, the issue is at the moment, a lot of us in a 3-5-2. I can't sit here and say that I think Edouard's a better option than Alvarez, because Alvarez is just a better player with similar fixtures over the next few, also putting up good data, playing in a better team. So I feel like at the moment, my favourite forward options are probably obviously Haaland, then Alvarez, then maybe Edouard. I'd love to know down below if anyone's taken a punt on him, because I'm very, very jealous. I've put Welbeck in here just because JPedro's obviously played a lot of minutes in Europe. He's not necessarily completely first choice. Ferguson's out with illness. Welbeck, there's a good chance, gets the start against Bournemouth. And whilst longer over the next sort of 4 or 5, Brighton's fixtures aren't great, longer term Brighton's fixtures are good. And Welbeck usually puts up decent data. It's not been the best this season, but I would expect him to probably get a start against Bournemouth. And if he does, could be a decent shout. The other one I wanted to discuss, a couple of questions around Ward-Prowse. Now, I've got a bit of a mental block around Ward-Prowse. And you'll understand this if you've been playing FPL for a while, because at Southampton, he ticked along really nicely. He always has, and he always puts up a decent score, 130 to 150 points in FPL by the end of the season. But he always ticks along with these like 5-pointers, and he's always played a much more defensive role than he is at the moment, I suppose, at West Ham. He's playing a little bit further forward. It's just this mental block that he's just such a safe player that ticks along, and he'll get you assists, might get you the odd goal, but never going to go out there and haul on a regular basis. But I need to look at the data. I need to look at the role that he's playing at West Ham and see that he's converting chances and he's creating really high-quality chances for his team too. And West Ham are a team that are very good from set pieces. And that is Ward-Prowse's major strength. So I think I need to stop and get rid of this bias and say 0.59 non-penalty expected goal involvement is great. He's getting assists for fun. And his goal threat's actually pretty decent at the moment too. So yeah, I don't mind a punt on Ward-Prowse. But obviously the fixture this week isn't great against Liverpool. After that, the fixtures start to improve. But I may be thinking that a punt on Ward-Prowse might be better from game week 8 onwards. And we'll discuss that at the end of the video when we look at fixture swings. But yeah, all of that to say I really like Ward-Prowse. And someone with exactly the same data is actually Eze. And Eze is another player that I really like because he's on penalties. He's a 90-minute man, as you can see here, 450 minutes. He's played every minute available for Crystal Palace. He's got the highest projected points on this list. I love Eze as an option. If I had Eze, there's not a chance in how I would be selling him. And I know he's probably been a frustrating own for the first 5 game weeks for owners, but this is where he came into his own. This is where the fixtures look good. And he's putting up decent data to match the likes of Diaby and Mbeumo. He's maybe just been a little bit unlucky not to do slightly better. So I really like Eze and I really like Edouard. And I would quite like a Palace attacker for the fixtures that they've got coming up. Another player that's putting up similarish data is Doku. We spoke about him earlier. I would expect him to start, but let's wait and see if we get any early team news. But if Doku does continue to get decent minutes, I think he will put up good data, and I do think he'll be both a goal threat, but maybe even more so a creative threat. And that's often what we'll see from the wingers playing at Man City, because they play a little bit wider, especially on the left-hand side, because on the right-hand side at the moment, Walker's playing quite wide, which means the winger inverts more. But on the left-hand side, Doku, Grealish, whoever it is, plays quite wide, which means I think he'll be creative. He'll get the odd chance to score too. And it just basically, it depends how quick Bernardo Silva comes back, how quick Grealish comes back. But if you're looking for a short-term punt over the next 1 or 2, I do really like Doku as an option. I've put Trossard on this list because obviously we'll discuss this in a second. Martinelli, we're not sure if he's going to be available or not. We're not sure how quickly he's going to come back. And Trossard could potentially be an option as a result. But we'll discuss that in the next section in more detail. But if you are fancying a punt on that North London derby, Trossard could be a really, really decent shout. I've got a Wonyi on here because his data and performances deserve mentioning, but this is obviously not the week to do it against Manchester City. I know he tends to perform quite well against the big teams. I mean, he scored against United, against Arsenal, but this isn't the week to bring in a Wonyi. But from game week 7 onwards, when Forest fixtures start to improve, I really don't mind him as a shout. And then we'll just finish with Rasmus Højlund. Do you want to own a Manchester United attacker at the moment? Probably not, but if you are to, is Højlund as good of an option as Rashford and Fernandes? Potentially. I mean, we've only seen him play 87 minutes in the league, but he looks like the focal point and he's looking like a proper striker, a proper forward, which is something that Manchester United have been lacking for a while. So if you want to take a punt on United attacker and you want to get rid of the likes of Rashford and Bruno for some of the slightly better midfield options, I don't mind Rasmus Højlund. So those are some of the differentials that I'd be considering. In particular, I really like the look of Edouard and Eze. I think it's time to start changing our perceptions around Ward-Prowse, and I quite like a cheeky 1 or 2 week punt on Doku as well. So very briefly, because I know not obviously everyone owns Martinelli, just a quick update on him. Apparently, he's being assessed ahead of the North London derby, and Arteta refused to rule him out as things stand. Now, I don't know if this is a mental thing, because I do think Arteta plays mind games more than most managers, so it could literally just be a case that he just doesn't want to give that away to Spurs and Postecoglou. I would predict that he probably doesn't start this game, even if he is fit enough. I think Trossard probably does get the nod, but what this probably tells me is that you maybe don't want to make the move on Trossard, because if Martinelli is back for this, Trossard will probably only play 60 to 70 minutes, and he probably will only play 60 to 70 minutes regardless of Martinelli, because there are enough options to come off the bench. And then probably I would say Martinelli will be back for the Bournemouth game. So for me, it probably puts me off of Trossard. It probably doesn't put me off of selling Martinelli, though. And the reason that I say that is there's a good chance he doesn't start against Spurs, in my opinion, based on what we know. Yes, Bournemouth is a decent fixture, but Martinelli is better at home. I think Arsenal are better at home, and it is Bournemouth away. And if on the off chance he does miss that fixture, they then have Manchester City and Chelsea. And I know people think Chelsea aren't great, but actually defensively they've been quite good. We know how good City are as well. So you're taking a real gamble there that he's back for the Bournemouth game. And even if he is it a great set of fixtures anyway in comparison to some of the other options? And you're going to probably want to sell Martinelli soon anyway. I would use this as the weekend opportunity to move off of Martinelli. Now, who are you going to move to if not Trossard? Because I just probably wouldn't feel completely comfortable making that move. I think it really depends on your strategy and when you plan on playing your wildcard. And we're going to discuss fixture swings in the next section. But I think if you're looking longer term, if you've already played your wildcard, or you're not sure when you want to play it and you think you may play it beyond game week 10 and maybe save it a little bit longer, I think Diaby of Aston Villa is an absolutely excellent option. And I think Maddison is a great option as well, because Spurs and Aston Villa's fixtures start to improve from sort of game week 9, game week 10 onwards. And I think they are two players that most people will want to own. So if you're looking longer term, you could do something like that. And as I say, if you're looking really short term, you've got the likes of Neto or a Doku. Or if you're looking maybe just a little bit shorter term, you could move for any of the midfielders like an Eze. You could even give Rashford a few weeks if you wanted to. So there are players with sort of a 3 to 4 week game week horizon that might be slightly better picks. So I can't really suggest, because it's all budget dependent and it's strategy dependent. But I would try to start thinking about when you see yourself wildcarding. And if you want to lock in a game week 9 or 10 wildcard, that's absolutely fine. You can start picking some slightly shorter term picks. But if you're not set on a game week 9 or a game week 10 wildcard, I think you might want to start thinking a little bit longer term. And someone like I said, a Diaby or a Maddison might be a slightly smarter play than some of the bolder options like a Doku or someone like a Neto. So let me know down below in the comments if you are a Martinelli owner. Are you looking likely to sell him? I think this is probably the opportunity to sell. So guys, I know I've been incredibly annoying recently asking for subscribers, but at the time of me recording this, I'll try to remember to flash it on the screen when I edit. We're less than 1,000 subscribers away from 100,000. So if you want me to shut up about it and stop asking, please do consider subscribing. But in all seriousness, this has been a goal that I've had for years now. Ever since starting YouTube, every YouTube channel dreams of hitting 100,000 because you get this silver plaque. It's a very, very big deal as a YouTuber. So if you would like to support me, if you've ever seen any of my videos, or maybe even if this is your first time and you could consider subscribing, it's completely free to do. It takes you 2 seconds whilst I'm talking. Just scroll down, hit that subscribe button. I would love to hit 100,000 on the Game Week 6 deadline stream, or potentially even before. But to do that, I need your help. So please consider subscribing if you haven't already. But what I wanted to discuss here was around upcoming fixture swings. I think that a lot of people, myself included, have spoken about for a while now this Game Week 8 to 10 fixture swings for quite a few of the teams. But maybe if you're not tracking the fixtures and you don't have access to some of the tools that we have, it can be tricky to know which teams have good fixtures coming up and which teams have bad fixtures coming up. So it's not as straightforward as just saying that a team's fixtures swing in one game week. So like Liverpool, you could argue that their decent fixtures have already started. You could also argue that it starts in game week 8 as opposed to game week 9. But this is roughly what I'm thinking in my mind. So if the team is in green, it means that in that game week, their fixtures start to turn for the better. And if the team is in red, it means in that game week, their fixtures start to turn for the worse. So you can see that arguably the biggest fixture swing is in game week 8. The likes of Villa, Palace, Forest, Bournemouth and Spurs start to go on a really, really nice fixture run. So if you don't have any players, and maybe you would say, well, I don't want to own any Bournemouth players, which may well be right, but Villa and Spurs in particular are two teams that are good and have great FPL options. And you could probably chuck Palace in there and maybe even Forest for someone like an Awonyi. So if you don't have any players from those teams, you may be sitting here thinking Game Week 8 wildcard could look good. And equally, if you have 2 or 3 Brentford players, let's say you have like Flecken and Burmo, and maybe you have like Foden, Doku and Haaland, Brentford and City's fixtures start to turn for the worst around Game Week 8. So maybe you think this is a really good point where with my team, the fixtures really start to turn. The issue that we have with a Game Week 8 wildcard is that Chelsea and Manchester United's fixtures still look good for at least 1 or 2 more weeks, and you might not care, you might want to sell them anyway, but if you do have Chelsea and United assets, you might want to give them slightly longer. And the other reason is, in Game Week 8, between Game Week 8 and Game Week 9, there is an international break. Wildcarding before an international break is always risky, because if 3 or 4 of your players get injured in the international break, which does sometimes happen, you're in a position where, despite only just wildcarding, you're needing to take a hit to even field 11 players. So it's never usually that bad, but it is also a bit of a risk wildcarding before an international break. Game Week 9 is, of course, the week after an international break, which is usually a lot more useful because you can react to anything that happens there. But I would argue that there are the least fixture swings. Like, most of the fixture swings take place in Game Week 8 or Game Week 10. The good thing is that Liverpool's fixture swing really starts from Game Week 9, where all of their really nice fixtures start. And also, Chelsea's fixtures start to end. So if maybe you're thinking about being patient with Chilwell, Sterling, Jackson, and giving them a little bit longer, you can give them their final good fixture in Game Week 8, remove them in Game Week 9, start to bring in triple Liverpool, I should say. And you can also look to bring in players from Aston Villa and Spurs still. You've just missed their first good game of their fixture run. So I do like Game Week 9. But maybe the one that I'm slightly more tempted by is Game Week 10, because you get a little bit more information. You don't have to wildcard before the international break. And also, Manchester United playing at Sheffield United in Game Week 9. And again, I know most people won't want to hang on to their United assets, but if you are being patient with them, Game Week 9 is the final good fixture for Manchester United, and then you can look to remove most of those assets. Also, in Game Week 10, West Ham's fixtures improve, and I do want at least 1 or 2 West Ham players. Arsenal's fixtures improve, and currently, I only have Saliba from Arsenal. And in Game Week 10, Brighton's fixtures start to improve. And whilst there is rotation at Brighton, I am looking at potentially jumping on 1 or 2 of their assets. So I'm thinking, in Game Week 8, I can still bring in Maddison and Diaby or something like that, right? I can still bring in 1 Villa asset. I can bring in 1 Spurs asset. In Game Week 9, I can remove 1 or 2 of my Chelsea assets. Potentially, I've got the free transfers. And I can still bring in, again, I could bring in an Awoniyi, or I could bring in a Luis Diaz. I could do like a 1-week punt on a couple of players. And then in Game Week 10, I can sort my team out fully, jump on the West Ham, Arsenal, and Brighton assets as well, and remove all of my Chelsea and Man United players. So I'm thinking that Game Week 10 probably makes the most sense for a wild card for me. But I also think Game Week 8 and Game Week 9 could make sense depending on your team structure. But I just wanted to make it clear which team's fixtures start to turn for the worst, which is mainly Brentford, City, Chelsea, Everton, if you, for some reason, have their assets like me, and then Manchester United and maybe Luton. Like, if you load up on players for the double game week from Luton, like a Morris, Game Week 10 is really when their fixtures start to turn for the worst. And then those are some of the teams where their fixtures are starting to improve very, very soon. So hopefully that's helpful. Let me know down below in the comments, when are you planning on wildcarding? So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 6 deadline decisions video. Hopefully it was helpful. And if any of the content today, either video, has been helpful, please do consider subscribing. It looks like we could potentially hit 100,000 before the Game Week 6 deadline, which would be, like I said, the absolute dream. So if you've not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Also, make sure to tune in to tomorrow's deadline stream, where hopefully we will hit 100k. We'll celebrate together, and we'll also see if we get any early Man City team news. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.